Hi everyone, welcome back to another week. I'm looking forward to a good discussion this week on couple relationships and how they're impacted by various forms of social media and cell phones and all the other ways in which we communicate electronically. Next week, our discussion is going to be about how we stay in touch with people who are far away from us. And to help us get ready for that, we're going to be looking at a video, a podcast, and a couple of readings, and we'll talk to you a little bit about those. But let me preface it by saying that the way in which we stay in touch with people who are near and dear to us but who don't live close to us has radically changed over the past 25 or 30 years. Well, the podcast that I'll talk about in just a moment has, in its introduction, the narrator talks about how his experience when he was in college was much different, and I can say much the same. When I went to college, I was in a dorm room, and this was, of course, pre-cell phones and pre-email and all those sorts of things. And we had a phone down at the end of the hallway that everybody on the floor shared. And probably every couple of weeks, if I was lucky, I'd call my parents collect, and it was very expensive to call them this way, but I'd call them collect just to let them know I was still alive and that things were going okay, and that was sort of the extent of my conversation with them. Well, things are a lot different now, and a lot of it is due to all the various ways we have of staying in touch with family members that are not only at our fingertips, but they're accessible, both financially and just they're right close to us. I think, for example, of the cell phone and how easy it is for us to call family members who live hundreds of miles away, or stay in touch with them via email or Facebook or Instagram or all the other kinds of social media that are available to us. It's great. It's great that we're able to stay in touch with families in that way. But it's also changed the family dynamic, particularly as children move away to college or move away from home. Because in some ways, even though they move away, they're still connected. And so one of the readings, a chapter from a book called I Connected by Hofer and Moore, talks about this. They've done a survey on this issue and talk about how much college students stay connected with their parents, and how parents work to stay connected with their college students when they leave home. And then the audio podcast is also deals with that same subject. This is from I think it was All Things Considered, or Morning Edition, one of the shows on NPR, one of the news shows. And they had a brief segment, probably about 5 minutes in length, that talks about this whole phenomenon of how do kids and their parents stay in touch when they're in college. And this may apply to some of you. Some of you I recognize maybe older students who have already made that transition from your parents' house to your own house or your own life, but others are still kind of in that transition. And that's what the reading and the podcast have, from Hofer and Moore, and the podcast from NPR deal with. We also use social media and the various forms of electronic communication to stay in touch with people who live a long way from us, who are near and dear to us. Grandparents, or maybe siblings who live in another place now, or aunts and uncles or cousins. And that's been one of the great things about the internet and all the various forms of ways that we have of staying in touch with people, that we know something about their lives, and that we can connect with them on a daily basis, as opposed to maybe a letter that occurs every couple of weeks or every month. Let me give you an example of this. A few years ago, when I was in sabbatical, we were living in Germany, and that was the point at which our grandson was born. And as much as we would have liked to have come back and been there for his birth, it just wasn't possible. But my son took his computer into the room, and shortly after he was born, we got to meet our new grandson. probably more quickly than if we had been sitting in the waiting room next door. It wasn't quite like being there, but it was great to be able to participate in that experience, even though we weren't really there, because we could participate in it electronically. Well, the various forms of electronic communication that we have that allow us to stay in touch with each other allow us to be connected to people that we love on a daily or regular basis. And there are two things I have for you this week. One is a reading, and the other is a brief video. The video is actually from it's a segment of a larger video, so called Digital Nation, which, like Generation Like, was a Frontline special. And so when you click on that video, the instructions will tell you where to go. I think it's about minute 41 or something like that in the video. And you'll find this section called Cooking with Bubby, which is about a collaboration between a grandmother and her grandson. And she has a cooking show that she does on the internet, and her grandson does all the technical work for it. It's a really great piece. I think you'll like it. But it also illustrates how people can, across the generations, collaborate to communicate with each other using electronic media. The other is a survey that was jointly done by Microsoft and AARP, the American Association of Retired Persons. And this survey really focuses on differences in preferences for communication in terms of electronic communication. And while it suggests that electronic communication has really helped build a bridge across the generations, it also suggests that people of different generations communicate or have different preferences in terms of how they communicate electronically. And so this article takes a look at that, and I think that'll provide some good material for our discussion next week. How do you communicate with your grandma, even if both of you are on on the computer? You may not communicate in quite the same way. Okay, looking forward to a great discussion this week, and we'll see you soon.